Lead Me Winter Training School Madrid 2021. Media Accessibility Training, Sign Language and Subtitling for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. Organised by the Tradaval Research Group and AVLA project at Complutense University Madrid.
I'll be talking, as Juanpe was saying, about involving users in media accessibility research. I will be dealing with some ethical aspects, and also I will put the focus on knowledge transfer in this short lecture. If you want to interrupt me at any point, that's not a problem at all. Just unmute yourself and ask me questions. And if you want to write them down on the chat, then I kindly ask Juanpe to please let me know. While you are not talking, please, can you make sure that your mic is muted? Because I hear some weird noises, and yeah, I think it's getting better. Thank you very much. I still hear it, but I can do it. Okay. For those of you who were in the summer school, this is not a requirement, of course, but just a reminder for those who were not there, maybe, very often research on audiovisual translation and media accessibility focuses on one of these aspects. And this is very much based on the book by Sharon O'Brien and Gabriela Saldaña, Translation Studies Methodologies. So sometimes we focus on the product. So we describe an audio description, we describe how subtitling is shown, for instance, for a specific program. Sometimes we focus on the process of creation, for instance, on the process of post-editing, etc. Sometimes we are more interested on the participants, on the end users, the ones that are using the audiovisual transfer modes or the accessibility services. And sometimes we are more interested, or we put the focus on the context, on the society, on ideology, on other aspects. And sometimes we mixed all those things, right? But very often, especially in the last years, in audiovisual translation and media accessibility, users have been at the center of research. Users who create content, so users that we analyze so that to better understand the processes of creation, for instance, or delivery, but also users who receive this audiovisual content, these access services, the end users. Another basic idea that I'm sure that you are all familiar with is this slogan, nothing about us without us. Persons with disabilities, when we research about access services, they want to be involved. Of course, it's obvious. I mean, you don't want someone else to be researching that has something that has a direct impact on you. So this is something that us as researchers need to keep in mind. Let's keep in mind that we want to work with the users who will be using the access services. Please, there's some music going on. Can you please mute yourself? Thank you very much. I'm not advocating for a medical approach, okay? I'm more in favor.
Please, if you are not going to ask or you are not going to participate, please unmute, mute your mics.
Okay, thank you very much.
I think it is already muted. Sorry, Anna. You are muted now.
But I didn't, okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Okay, so let's keep in mind this slogan and involve as many users as possible in our researches. Not taking a medical approach, but a more open approach, a more capability-based approach. Sorry. When we involve users as participants, we gather data from these users very often. And this data can be qualitative, quantitative, and we can use a wide variety of methods to gather this data. I'm not going to get into that. This is something we discussed in the last summer school, and I'm sure those of you who were not there are familiar with this. But we can gather data through eye tracking, electrodermal activity, heart rate, keystroke logging, but also with through focus groups, through interviews, through questionnaires. If any of you is interested in any of these topics that I'm not going to get into detail, so all these research methods, etc., I think that the book by Gabriela Saldana and Sharon O'Brien, Research Methodologies in Translation Studies, is a good book on methodology. It's an excellent book, actually. I also would recommend, from a broader perspective, Scientific Methods for Humanities. And if you are interested in more innovative approaches, maybe more creative, this is a book I recently read, Creative Research Methods in the Social Sciences, which provides quite interesting food for thought. From a more global perspective, I always recommend Social Research Methods by Alan Bryman. For me, it's a fantastic book. I learned a lot from this book. And then if you are more interested in user experience, user testing, I'm familiar with these two. I'm sure there are more books, but these two, Observing the User Experience and Measuring the User Experience, are good volumes. Anyway, let's get to the main topic of my talk after this brief introduction, which is users and media accessibility research. I think that the first thing we need to ask ourselves is, who are the users? Who are the users that we want to do research with? How do we categorize them? And then how do we deal ethically with them? So I like to present examples from ongoing projects, in this case, European projects, because it gives us a perspective of how these topics can be approached. So maybe some of these topics are far from your research interest right now, but I'm sure you will get some ideas out of this. So the first one is Traction. Traction is a European project in which we are co-creating an opera in 3 different places. So in Raval, in a neighborhood in Barcelona, Liceu Opera House is co-creating an opera with people from the neighborhood. In Leiria, in Portugal, there is a co-creation process ongoing at Leiria's prison with young inmates. And then, and that is led by SAMP Musical School. And the third place where this co-creation is taking place is in Ireland. The Irish National Opera is co-creating an opera with diverse communities from the Aran Islands and from rural areas in Ireland. So imagine you start a project, a big 3-year project with many partners, a European project, and we want to research co-creation processes in 3 very different locations. And we want to do user tests to assess the co-creation, how the co-creation is going and how the performance are, and also the social impact. So one of the first things we had to do in this project was define who the users are. And in this case, after much discussion, we came up with a categorization and with definitions. So in that particular project, for instance, we decided that there would be professionals and non-professionals, and then that we would have artists and we would have users. Artists co-creating, users using the technology. I'm not going to get into the details because I'm not interested in the definitions right now. What I'm interested in is in the concept. So the first step was to define the users. You can only involve users once you know the users you want to involve. And the second thing we did was categorize the users, okay? So in Traction participants, we'll have professionals who can be from the artistic team, the technical and production team, from Traction, and we will have non-professionals, again, with different categories, working together on a co-creation process. Additionally, we'll have audiences, and we'll also have other people involved. Why do we need this? we need these definitions and we need these categorizations, because when we start doing user tests, when we involve users in the testing, we need to know which users we want to involve for each specific test. And even if it seems very simple, I think that's the aim, to make things easy and to make categorizations and definitions that work across different trials. In these cases, I was talking about Ireland, Barcelona, and Portugal. So this is one example of how we categorize users in the Traction project. A similar thing happened in Mediaverse, totally different project, totally different approach. In this project, which is an ongoing project, what we are doing is developing like a platform, like an ecosystem. But imagine like a platform where you log in and then you can access different tools, I'm putting it very simply, and you can create content and you can share it with other people and you can even monetize it, okay? So you say, okay, I give this for free, or maybe no, I want to get some money out of it, or you decide, you know, who owns the copyright, etc. It's like, imagine a social media, but not owned by a company, but using what's called blockchain technology. So we own it. I mean, it's like an ecosystem, a distributed one. Okay, the idea was that here again, we are developing something, in this case, a platform, and we want to use that in 3 very different cases. So there will be one trial in which people will be using this Mediaverse platform to be what's called citizen journalists. Imagine you are at a demonstration, okay, and you take pictures, and then you upload them on this platform instead of the usual social media, and there you decide if, you know, if a media company wants to use that, what's the acknowledgement that they have to give you, how they can use it, do they have to pay you? You can decide all these things, okay? So we want to use that platform for citizen journalism. We want to use that platform also for co-creating content with vulnerable people as a tool for social inclusion. Let me put one example. We are working with migrant people who create this content to tell their stories, their narratives, and they co-create it in 360 videos, etc. And they will be uploading this content on the platform. And finally, in the Mediaverse project, we'll be doing artistic experiments. If you are not lost at this point, because I know that I'm explaining this very, very quickly, the main idea is we'll have a platform that we will be using for very diverse purposes, and we'll need to test if it works, okay? So what's the first step when you want to involve users? Defining who the users are. And with such diverse profiles and case studies that we will be doing, in this case, what we decided to do is identify the main roles that a user can have in the platform. So a user can be an administrator, a user can manage content, a user can simply produce content, the videos, or a user can consume the videos. And maybe some of them have different roles at the same time. So I just put 2 examples from 2 ongoing European projects to see how we approach the categorization of users. And this is always a first step in any research project with users. So maybe you can adapt this to your context. When working with users, it is absolutely fundamental, actually it's a requirement, to take into account ethical aspects. So I will be referring now to the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, to the European Code of Conduct for Research Integrity. I will make some specific comments about social sciences and humanities research. I will also briefly comment on the concept of vulnerable groups, and then I'll give you some advice to take into account before, during, and after the research has been conducted. As far as the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, which you can read afterwards, you've got the link there, I selected 3 excerpts. The first thing is that everyone has the right to the protection of personal data concerning him or her. So this is a right that we all have in the European Union. And such data, and I read literally, must be processed fairly for specified purposes and on the basis of the consent of the person concerned or some other legitimate basis laid down by law. Everyone has the right of access to data which has been collected concerning him or her and the right to have it rectified. Many of these things will come up later, you'll see, when I present you a sample of a consent form. And the third quote I selected is specifically on persons with disabilities, and it says that the Union recognizes and respects the right of persons with disabilities to benefit from measures designed to ensure their independence, social and occupational integration and participation in the life of the community. If we move to the European Code of Conduct for Research and Integrity, and I strongly recommend that you read that document. It's a fantastic document, and as researchers, we should be familiar with it. And it says that when we develop a research, there are some principles that we need to take into account. Reliability in ensuring the quality of the research. So you need good design, methodology, analysis, and use of resources. You need to be honest. You need to be honest when you develop, you undertake, you review, or you report, you communicate research, and you have to do it in a transparent, fair, full, and unbiased way. We need to show respect for colleagues, and I underline specifically research participants, what I'm referring to as users in this case, society, ecosystems, cultural heritage, and the environment. And there needs to be accountability for the research from idea to publication, management, training, supervision, etc., etc. So that's, I just want to highlight that research participants are mentioned, and this code specifically says that we should respect them, which is obvious. But how do we respect them? We need shared guidelines, shared understanding of what that means. Researchers, and I keep reading, handle research subjects, be they human, animal, cultural, biological, environmental, or physical, with respect and care, and in accordance with legal and ethical provisions. It is crucial, it is of crucial importance that we know the methodologies, that we are familiar to them. And this is a good way to avoid, as it states on this quote, to expose research subjects, users, society, or the environment to unnecessary harm. There was this document, this is an old document, a draft document from 10 years ago, but still it has some interesting insights, because sometimes researchers in the social sciences and humanities tended to think that, oh no, all these ethical things, it's with, you know, people trying a vaccine or doing some experimental research in medical sciences. No, it also affects us. Sometimes we may just gather data about our participants, but it's not just, it's a lot. I mean, it's data that they own, so we need to be respectful of that data. But also we may be using some devices which may cause some harm, or some, rather than harm, maybe discomfort. So we need to be aware of all these things. This is especially relevant when we work with persons from what are called vulnerable groups, and I put that into inverted commas. This is a terminology that is sometimes used, although not everybody likes this concept of vulnerable. And on this European textbook on ethics in research, again, a good read for all of you, basically it says that people need to be able to give consent, and they need to be able to give consent in a way that they understand, okay? We need to take into account also the condition, the physical or psychological condition of the subjects, to avoid this harm that I was referring to. before. I wanted to give you an example from the EASIT project. Why? Because it's a different example. Whenever we do a research project in which we involve users, always we require ethical clearance. We send documents to, in my case, UAB's ethical committee, and we get approval. Yes, is there a question? Yes, go ahead.
Yes. Aska, do you have a question?
Yeah.
Do you have a question?
No, I just joined the meeting. Sorry, I don't have any questions.
Okay.
Sorry. I was mentioning, that whenever you do a research, you need to get ethical clearance, ethical approval from an ethical committee. In my case, I do that through UAB's ethical committee. You cannot do research with users without having this approved ethical clearance. So I'm going to present an example from the EASIT project, which was a project that finished very recently on easy to understand language. And since it was on easy to understand language, we wanted to take a different approach. But first, let me explain you. When I submit this proposal to my ethical committee, and this can change depending on the ethical committee, but I can imagine that what I have here will be requested by any ethical committee. It's the title of the project. So I need to submit the title of the project, a short description, the area, if it's psychology, if it's another area, the research area for human experimentation, who will be the responsible, there needs to be someone responsible, the research objectives and methodology, the information that will be given to participants. We need to explain if there will be compensation or not, how management will be gathered, and look, also how feedback will be given to participants. And we need to acknowledge that the data will be protected according to data regulations, in this case GDPR in European Union, and that there will be a data protection officer. So in the EASIT project, we created an information sheet